likely the final edition of the podcast in the month of August. The CUB Central podcast rolls right along. Pretty wild. We're getting into September, Brad. Some teams are wrapping up international trips. Northwestern still out in Rome. They were out in France earlier in the trip, but there was college football to watch last weekend. We're really getting into some preseason time in the college basketball world. I'm getting way too excited about the possibility of Pat Spencer being a good basketball player. What's new?
I'm glad that you're the latest person to catch the optimism bug. After what? For most teams, 5 months of off season, you can only keep the realism in check for so long. It's hard to me. It's hard for me to think of a team that that I haven't seen like overly optimistic predictions from their fans from. I mean, even I saw the other day a Wake Forest fan was kind of complaining to you that they weren't in your top 100.
Oh my God!
I've seen UNLV fans think that they're going to be good. I think both Wake and UNLV. If you put them in your top 100, I wouldn't call you crazy. I would probably have them in like my top 130-ish. But I've seen Virginia Tech fans think that they're going to be good, and that's in for a very disappointing season. I know Kevin's leading the DePaul bandwagon himself.
Yes. Don't sleep on the Blue Demons.
Which, I mean, if they get Charlie Moore, I mean, they should be pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the time for optimism. You have about two more months of off season. Probably, I bet about 6 weeks of that you can maintain your optimism, and then probably when you're a Virginia Tech fan and you see being picked 14th, 15th, then maybe it starts to hit you that could be a long year.
See, it doesn't hit most of them though, Brad. Then they just comment on the tweets and get really mad at you for ranking them that way. That you're sleeping on amazing recruits like Jalen Cone. Virginia Tech has 3 starting caliber players in the ACC, but don't sleep. Mike Young, gonna turn him into a power. But now that Wake Forest guy was ridiculous. He's like, they had an amazing 2017 recruiting class. I was like, it's 2019, dude. Like, what are you talking about? Oh, well, they're getting good now. I was like, they lost their second best player and their starting center from a team that was terrible last year. Just absolutely terrible. And they bring in nothing of consequence other than like a shooter and Andrian White. I mean, come on.
So Asar's back, right?
Yes, but I guess I was counting Smart as their center, which they played 2 bigs.
And I mean, that's kind of the recipe for a rebuild, right? Is like you have a good recruiting class, they take their lumps, and then when they're older, they're good.
Yep.
But the thing with Wake Forest is they have to jump so many teams. We talked about this a few podcasts ago. Guys who were disappointing, but they were kind of off the radar, so you didn't know it until you were like looking through the stats. I know you were talking about with Demetric Trice. When I was looking at Wake Forest's team when I was rebuilding my depth charts, Isaiah Mucius, who was a top 100 recruit, maybe even top 75, 32% from the field, 61% from the free throw line, and 24% from 3. As they're like kind of, the recruiting rankings get really weird with the positions. They're always putting guys one up position. So I think they probably had him as a small forward. He's a power forward in the modern basketball setting. But I mean, they bring a lot back, but Horde's gone, and they need a ton of guys to take jumps to even reach like a semi-competitive level.
Well, my thing with it is like, at one point last year, you felt like, okay, Wake Forest has the talent to be good. Jalen Horde, Childress, Mucius, as you mentioned. Sar is a talented guy. They had enough talent where you go, oh, this is an average level roster. But like at this point, like even if guys are jumping, this is not a good roster. Right? Like this roster is still a bottom 5 roster in the league with a bottom 5 coach in the league. I mean, there's no reason for optimism. The guy who had 9 followers on Twitter was really going off on me because I couldn't for Wake Forest. But there's a bunch of teams. I did find it interesting. I was doing my top 100. I tweeted that out all of last week. I had some questions. Oh, you didn't have St. John's in the top 100. You didn't have this team in the top 100. Like, how many power conference teams weren't in the top 100 last year? So, all right, let me look. And there were 11 Power 6 teams. So I excluded the American because a lot of outliers with like East Carolina, Tulane. But the top 6 leagues, 11 teams were non-top 100. And then I looked at mine, and I had 11 teams that were not top 100. So I felt pretty good about that. But I think that provides a pretty interesting perspective. Kept Northwestern out of my top 100. I think I still will. No reason to adjust based on the trip. A little bit of optimism with Spencer and Miller Kopp playing well. Kopp averaging like 20 and 8 or 9 rebounds so far on the trip, which has been good. Although, he's a big 6'7" wing. He should be rebounding against bad competition. So definitely something to monitor. But I think 10 to 11 teams staying out of the top 100 is probably about right, especially, bottom of the Pac-12 will kind of give you 4 or 5. The ACC's got a few that you could see with Virginia Tech, Boston College, Wake, Clemson, all potential ones to fall out. So just thought that was an interesting nugget to kind of bring up on the topic of Wake Forest and other bad Power 5 teams.
So for my top 100, I don't have St. John's. I don't have Indiana or Northwestern. I don't have TCU. Vanderbilt is 5. Then Wake, Clemson, Virginia Tech, that's 8. And then Utah, Stanford, Cal, Washington State is 12. So I'm one more than there was last year. I think probably the hottest take there is probably Indiana being outside for me.
Yes, I think that's a little hot for me, but it's not. I don't think it's absurd. I think their bottom end outcome is definitely outside the top 100, and that would also mean they're looking for a coach in 6 months. Yeah, there's no way Archie can survive a non-top 100 season.
Even if they return to the NIT this year, you would think that they're gone, right? That Archie's gone?
I mean, I could see making a case for, okay, we're going to run it back for the most part. You got some recruits signed. You win 18 to 20 games and make the NIT, just miss the cut, kind of like you did this year. You could probably make it. But if this is like a 500 team, I think it's going to be a really tough sell to the Indiana fan base. And they're going to want success. So I know I don't want to say he's done, but I mean, it doesn't feel good. And it's not getting talked about enough in my mind that Indiana is very much a job that could open this year. I know he's got a big contract, but I have a feeling they'd find the money.
And I mean, that was an incredible hire. Kind of like the Brad Underwood one. You can't rip the hire. Clearly it's not working out. I'm all for patience, but blowing last year's team when you had Romeo Langford and J'Von Morgan, with the pieces around them, which looks solid on paper. That was a tough look, and I don't see this team being anywhere close to NCAA tournament. Another team in a similar spot is Stanford. A little longer of a drought there for Jared Haas, but losing KZ Okpala, Josh Sharma graduating. I mean, I think that this team is just short on talent.
I don't think the talent is that bad. I mean, they still have Davis. They have Ty Terry, who's going to be very good. They've got some pieces and guys coming back like Lucas Kisunas. A few other names that are escaping. But Jared Haas is under 500 3 years. He's probably going to finish under 500 this year. I mean, I've not heard a lot of, he's on the hot seat, but I don't really know that you're going to keep him around.
Well, I guess the thing is, he's supposedly a serious contender for Zaire Williams, who's on the U19 team, who's like the 7th best player in the country. They're also in the mix for Mark Williams, who's a top 50 center, which he could. I think most people have him going to Duke, but he would be the backup center behind probably Walker Kessler, who's looking maybe to Duke, maybe Auburn, the team that we're about to touch on. But if Kessler goes to Duke, I mean, he could go there and be the backup center. But Stanford would be a legitimate option there. And then there was another top 100 guy, Dom Clifford, who I think Stanford's in the mix for. He's had a quiet recruitment, but then I think they're also leading for Ben Carlson, either him or Xavier, I think, for Carlson, who's like a top 100 guy as well. And then Max Merle, who's another power forward. Maybe they only get one of Carlson and Merle, but still, that they could have a class with 3 or 4 top 100 guys.
But they've had it every year.
I know, but it's a whole Lorenzo Romar thing. It's like at some point you just got to say, you know what, I understand that you have Michael Porter in your hand, but we're going to start over. And it's a work for Washington.
Yeah, I don't know. I think my thing with Stanford, and it's the same thing with Northwestern. I mean, Stanford doesn't have the facilities, but like we know you can recruit there now. There was this stigma of like, oh, you don't want that Stanford job, that Northwestern job, some of these high academic programs because I'm not going to be able to get the players I want in. And obviously there are some restrictions that come with being the head coach of Northwestern and being the head coach of Stanford. You can't just take anyone. But Stanford's had no problem recruiting. There's been no issue for, him to land, a Dejon Davis, to land a Ty Terry, to land Cormac Ryan, to land, the guys he's continued to, make headway with, Bryce Wills on the recruiting trail. He just obviously can't seem to coach his way out of a paper bag.
Well, his hire was not a slam dunk like a Brad Underwood or an Archie Miller.
Right.
He still won an NCAA tournament game. He built a few good teams at UAB. He recruited well there. He had an awesome front court during his time there. So it wasn't, this isn't like even like an Andy Enfield like flash in the pan. I mean, he was a UNC assistant and he had some serious success in Conference USA.
No, it was a fine hire. It doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah.
But, we could poke holes in every coach all day. That's not this podcast, is it, Brad, for today?
Well, first, I have to issue a retraction.
Uh-oh.
It's not NEC. It's NEC. So not like Mac, SWAC. What do you... I call it the Metro, but I guess I shouldn't be so liberal with my conference assignments. What do you call what I call the Metro?
The Metro is the MAC. Any Siena fan or any Iona fan would call it the MAC. But
do we differentiate between the MAC?
Who goes to Buffalo calls what?
Do we differentiate between the MACs?
So my friend who goes to Buffalo calls it the MAC, and everyone I know calls it MAC, for the single A MAC. So I'd always just say single A MAC, double A MAC if I have to indicate. But I have not. I've always done MAC and Mid-American if I've had to choose one, not Metro. I
like just occasionally like a breaking up an acronym, like saying El Paso instead of UTEP, or what made me think of it was I was about to say Birmingham for a UAB, but I kind of like doing Metro and MAC, but I think for the sake of riding a straight line here, I'll go with double A MAC.
Okay.
But yeah, it's NEC. It's not.
You got to be careful because the people of Twitter were very mad that.
Well, like
it was found out the NEC, not NEC.
But if like you call the SEC like the SEC, like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Because originally I was like, what conferences do you spell out? And I was like, well, the WCC or like the ACC, but they're not. Like they don't look like words. But then I guess SEC.
The ACC is the AC.
Yeah.
But then the AAC is AC.
All right. Now we know.
Can we make an entire podcast of making conference noises?
We need to invite a guest from every conference to help us with our pronunciation. We get dinged with a pronunciation more than anything, which I guess is good. If you're gonna get dinged on anything be pronunciation. But
fair enough. Fair enough. We'll try to miss no pronunciations today on the show as we dive into both Auburn and Marquette. We're going to start, Brad, with the Auburn Tigers.
Auburn Tigers, Final Four. Almost knocked off Virginia. The fans ran out of the building and everything, and that was a disaster. They won 12 straight games before the Virginia loss. They won the SEC tournament, 30-10, 11-7 in the SEC, 11th in KenPom, 6th in offense, 36th in defense. I think surprisingly, right? You think Auburn, you think running, gunning, shooting threes, moderate tempo, only 155th in tempo, but they were second in forcing turnovers. They forced turnovers on about a quarter of their possessions, which that's certainly one reason for success, to be able to do something that high tempo teams want to do at a more moderate tempo. 326th in defensive rebounding, but wasn't a total indictment on their bigs. I know that Big O's small at times with a Okiki McLemore front court, and then Austin Wiley wasn't really himself last year, but 34th in effective field goal percentage, and 21st in 3-point percentage, 7th in points off three. So they were extremely efficient from both in the arc and behind the arc, and they were 7th in the country in terms of points off threes. That's certainly a recipe for the 6th best offense. And the kind of defining trait of that sixth best offense was Jared Harper and Bryce Brown firing threes, pulling up, being aggressive, super difficult to guard. So as expected, when you're 7th in points off threes, it's got to come from somewhere. So they were 349th in points off twos. Kevin, do you know the one high major team who had fewer points off twos last year?
This is very difficult. It's got to be a team taking a lot of threes, obviously. Give me a conference.
Here, instead, I'll give you that we've done a deep dive on them this year.
Okay. Lowest points off of twos, you say?
Yep. So it was second lowest in the country, but lowest high major.
Purdue.
Villanova.
Oh, I was between two.
And then the lowest in the country was Baker Dunleavy's Quinnipiac team.
Yep, that makes sense.
But so they were 349th in points off twos, Auburn was, but 103rd in a 2-point percentage. And then they were 34th in experience. So surprisingly, they were able to keep most of their core together despite despite guys having success and guys coming off suspension. Like you wouldn't necessarily expect guys like Donjel Purifoy and Austin Wiley to stick around, but they did, and especially Purifoy was a key piece down the stretch. They did lose Mustafa Heron to St. John's and Deshaun Murray to Western Kentucky and Davion Mitchell to Baylor, but they were able to be better than they were the year prior. And so this year they're going to have to play differently, right? Brown and Harper hit 141 and 98 threes, respectively. And then Chuma Okeke at 55 threes and Malik Dunbar at 42 threes. That's 4 of their top 5 3-point shooters, including their top 3. Samir Doty was 4th. But, so I mentioned Doty. He's probably their best player now. I mean, maybe it's Isaac Okoro, but Doty's definitely their best returner, definitely the best shooter and all-around perimeter scorer. He's a good player, and so is J'Von McCormick, but they're nowhere close to Harper and Brown. And then the same can be applied with Donjel Purifoy replacing Chuma Okeke. Purifoy's good. It's just not the same, especially shooting the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I almost kind of want to compare Okoro to Okeke in terms of his all-around impact. We'll get into that in a second. I do want to give you the full in and out with this roster. So they bring a top 20 recruiting class, 6 freshmen and a JUCO transfer, Tyrell Jones, fringe 150 recruit at guard, Isaac Okoro, a top 40 recruit on the wing who some people pencil in as a top 10 pick in the draft coming up in the next summer. I think that's a little bullish for me, but I've watched some tape of his games. I watched some McEachern games, mostly scouting Northwestern commit Jared Jones, and he's very good. He impacts the game in a lot of ways. They also add 2 wings from the high school ranks, and Devin Cambridge, a kind of combo forward type who's immensely athletic. Looked like he wouldn't qualify. He qualifies late. He's going to reclassify and come this year. Played this summer at Peach Jam with AOT and was very, very good. AOT has become a bit of an import of sorts to Auburn. Sharif Cooper, the main target in 2020. Alan Flanagan, fringe 300 recruit, more of a developmental piece. Jalen Williams, top 150 recruit at the 4. He could pencil in some minutes early, depending on how Pearl likes to break out the rotation. And then Babatunde Akingbola was the player who famously now committed during Auburn's recruiting ban that they imposed on themselves. He also could potentially play some front court minutes, depending on how Bruce Pearl wants to play. Javon Franklin, the JUCO prospect, very athletic combo forward type as well. Leaving our 5 players, 3 graduate, 2 go pro early. Bryce Brown, Malik Dunbar, and Horace Spencer graduate, and Jared Harper and Chuma Okiki go pro with eligibility remaining.
So it was Akingbola who committed during this mythical ban, and it was Williams who visited, and Okoro and the whole AOT squad?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, even if they didn't have any commits or pictures of people visiting during that time, I mean, it's the way that the story was worded by the beat writer who tweeted it out was like they had absolutely no contact. Like, you're telling me if the AOT coach texted an assistant during that 8 months, they were going to ghost him, like they weren't going to contact him at all. It just didn't hold water, and then you found all the pictures and all the evidence there. But moving on to this team, I think the starting lineup is pretty clear. I think we have probably 6 candidates for 5 spots. So I'm going with McCormick, who played great down the stretch. He's like a speedy point guard who can get to the rim. Kind of like an energizer type. He only hit 10 threes all season though, out of 20 attempts. But averaged 8 points a game in the NCAA tournament, which was twice his season average. So I think him and Doty in the backcourt. Doty's a leading returning scorer at 7.3 points a game and 42% from a 3-point range. I think he probably gets up into that 13, 14 point per game range and takes a more active role in the offense. And then we mentioned Okoro. It's easy to see why he's being so hyped up in the draft world, because like his AAU averages of 17 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.6 steals, 1.3 blocks. I mean, just contributing to all the categories and being so athletic, being a defensive stopper, and being a guy who can create and facilitate. That's really appealing in today's NBA. And then I think Purifoy slots in at the 4. Played a much smaller role coming off his suspension, which I was surprised that he adjusted to. He was known more as like a chucker as a freshman, where he averaged 11 points a game. So hopefully he can kind of scale up while not regaining the old habits. And then the 5 is where I think gets interesting, where you can go Macklemore and kind of stick small and versatile, or go with Austin Wiley and try to feature him more, get him back to his freshman year and kind of his U18 form.
Yeah, I was kind of debating over that. I went with Macklemore at the 5. I thought you could even play, bring Purifoy off the bench, but I read that Bruce Pearl's been really pleased with how Purifoy has played this summer, and is slotting him into a big role. So that made the decision easy for me. So I penciled in Wiley as the off-the-bench big, kind of in a similar role, maybe playing a little bit more minutes than he did last year. But, trying to create this very athletic, switchable lineup. I mean, obviously McCormick and Doty don't have great size to switch onto bigs, but, they're both very athletic. They're smart players. Okoro can guard literally 1 through 5, which is something that's really exciting to watch. And then Purifoy, another versatile defender, before McLemore, who's an elite rim protector. The rim protection was a big part of Auburn's defensive success last season. Obviously, Okoro can help in that regard as a weak side rim protector. He had some blocks in the games I watched. Won't be the same as Okiki, but I think they'll look for kind of the same. A lot of the stuff that Chuma Okiki did from the defensive end, I think they'd love to get from Isaac Okoro. Obviously, they'd love to get it from anyone, but they'd love to get it from Isaac Okoro. Just kind of give a little scouting report on him from what I watched. He's not necessarily a guy who you're going to put in a ball screen as a ball handler, but he can make good decisions on a short roll. If he's playing small ball 4, he can, put the ball on the deck and kick out, make passes, once he drives down to a big with a dump off look. He can't really shoot the 3 consistently in my mind. He's not a great shooter, but I think he'll shoot enough where you have to get out and guard him. But very athletic and can take over a game. Just such a bulldog getting downhill is something that really popped out to me on tape. He goes for every rebound. He plays so hard. He's going to be a really fun player to watch.
Absolutely. And I think, playing him next to shooters will really maximize that. I know Purifoy, he was known more as a scorer than a shooter, but he still shot 36% from 3. Now being probably the full-time small ball 4. McLemore hit 37 threes last year, playing the 4 and the 5, mostly the 5, if I remember correctly. They also had Horace Spencer and Austin Wiley getting 5 minutes last year. I'm guessing McLemore is also going to play some 4 this year next to Wiley, but with Purifoy and him in the front court, and then you have Doughty, and then off the bench you have Jamal Johnson, who is billed as a shooter. Didn't shoot great as a freshman in Memphis, but a lot of freshmen struggle from 3, so that just gives them another shooter off the bench. And then McCormick shot 50% from 3, hardly any attempts, only half an attempt per game, but there is potential here to surround Okoro with a lineup full of shooters.
Yeah, I think McCormick's really the swing piece in a lot of this, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts because you talked about how well he played down the stretch in the NCAA tournament. That wasn't being played, we're going to take Jared Harper off the floor. Jared Harper stayed on the court almost all game in the NCAA tournament, trying to pull that exact statistic here. But McCormick was rarely looked to the same way Harper was to put the ball in his hands and create. He was a menace in transition. If he got downhill, he was incredibly difficult to stop. He was a guy who you could give to. You could put him in a quick ball screen. He could get downhill and make a read. Harper played in the NCAA tournament 39 minutes against Kentucky, 34 against Virginia, 35 against Kansas, 31 against Mexico State. These games that you're referencing of him playing, of the great play by McCormick was oftentimes next to Jared Harper, not sans Jared Harper. And so I'm interested to see how McCormick adjusts into being a true lead guard, a guy who can run an offense and orchestrate stuff. Because, Doty's not really that guy either. He's more of a secondary ball handler. He can hit outside shots, get downhill, slash. He's very smooth. I'm just not sure they have a guy you trust to, kind of orchestrate an offense and make plays consistently for others. And that's a pretty big concern for me for an offense that, obviously emphasizes pace and space, but also emphasizes an ability to, play an NBA style with a point guard who can really create for others and distribute out of pick and roll and, make really good reads. I remember watching the G League Elite Camp and being really impressed by Jared Harper's ability to be put in ball screens and just be confident, whether that was getting downhill and then making a pass from the baseline, whether that was, making the right read in the pick and roll, whether that was, getting on transition and making the right pass on the outlet. Like, he was a really good passer and a really good creator for others, not just a ball mover. And I'm not sure that McCormick is that guy.
Absolutely. I mean, he's my X factor for this team. They really need him to take a next step because they also need Doty to take a bigger role. They need Purifoy. Maybe those guys in a bigger setting can create more for themselves. But in terms of creating for others, you mentioned Okoro's not like a point wing, right? Like he's not like a Wesley Iwundu. Like you're not going to put him in a pick and roll. Maybe that's something that they try. Maybe that's something that they kind of force that into happening to make him more of a primary ball handler. But on paper, it certainly looks like it has to be McCormick because the only other point guard is Tyrell Jones, who as the 115th best player in the country, those players are not starting point guards on good teams as freshmen. They're either good players on bad teams or they're guys who are on good teams who can come off the bench, but they have to wait their turn to be the full-time point guard. It's extremely, extremely rare. You have your Trey Burke, but for every Trey Burke, you have guys like Jordan McCabe or like Brad Davison or Trent Frazier who they play okay, but the team success just isn't there.
And on Tyrell Jones, of the 9 games that Prep Circuit has stats for his senior year of high school, he had averaged 4.2 assists per game. So it's not like he's a super high assist passer like a Harper who could really create for others either. He's more of a scoring guard as well. So I think, that's the main concern for me if you look at this Auburn team is how do they adjust to life without Harper, life without Bryce Brown, who was a guy who could just absolutely ignite a game. I remember the game at Auburn against Kentucky where Charles Barkley was there and they kept panning to him every 3 seconds on the ESPN feed. And Auburn was just getting killed in every facet of the game. I mean, they had no chance. But Bryce Brown just went berserk from 3 in the second half, and it single-handedly kept them in it. And Harper had that same ability. And even guys like Malik Dunbar and Okiki were very good shooters. You don't have that, safety net anymore. So I think that's a legitimate concern in terms of just a guy who could keep you in a game when the rest of the offense was struggling and when you were overmatched athletically. So that's definitely something to monitor. I think this team almost has to form a different identity. This is not going to be a top 10 offense in Ken Palm. I'd be very surprised if they are. I think they're going to have to be a team that really thrives on its ability to defend. Whether that's an elite defender in Okoro, McCormick, who I think can be a pest. Doty's really solid on that end of the floor. Purifoy can be. McLemore's a great rim protector. Wiley can be kind of an interior force at times. Some versatility. An athlete like Devin Cambridge, who you could bring off the bench, or Jalen Williams. I think one of them probably gets immediate minutes. You got Jamal Johnson, who's a shooter off the bench. He's probably not going to provide much on the defensive side of the ball, but they have some potential to be an elite defense. I think for this team to get towards the top 25 again, which we're not projecting, this is going to have to be a top 15 defense, maybe top 20.
Yeah, and just one last point on the offense too. It was huge that Austin Wiley came back just to give the offense another dimension. A big guy who you can pound it inside to. He's not a super polished post player, but he's very big. He's very strong, and when he's active, I mean he's a force on the inside. So just giving them the other dimension, I think is really big for them. And we touched on earlier about how so many teams have depth, and Auburn certainly has center depth, but their depth is certainly questionable when you compare it to other teams. On the surface, right? You have Austin Wiley off the bench, which is a excellent piece for any bench. You have Jamal Johnson, who was 7-3 as a freshman on a pretty mediocre Memphis team, and not mediocre for a high major, like mediocre in the grand scheme of college basketball. That's fine. He needs to shoot it better to really make the most of his role here. But then you have, Tyrell Jones is ranked 115th, which is fine as your backup point guard, but it's not like a value add, right? And then you have one of Jalen Williams, Javon Franklin, and Devin Cambridge will probably be in the rotation. So one of those 3 guys. Williams was ranked 120th. He's like a lefty combo forward who can stretch the floor. So I think he probably has the inside track at minutes. And then Franklin is just like a athlete, right? He's like a guy who's listed as a small forward, but he's not like a shooter. He's probably gonna have to try to out athletic people at that power forward spot. I think Cambridge, who you touched on earlier, had a big summer, but being a year older than everybody, right? As a 2019 recruit, and he's ranked 214th. So I think probably Williams gets a nod and he'll play some 4, maybe even some 3, because he can shoot the ball. But a bench, as we just described, on paper compared to other teams in Auburn's range, projecting to make the NCAA tournament, that's not a value add for them.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. I think it for that bench to be a value add, as you said, you need someone to exceed expectations, and maybe that's Cambridge. He's a guy I watched a little bit of AOT at Peach Jam. He's the guy who first came onto my radar when Desmond Cambridge, his brother, committed to Nevada. I saw reports that perhaps Devin could go with, and watched the tape of him and was like, oh my gosh, how is this kid this athletic? I mean, he is so bouncy. It is absolutely remarkable. But just kind of giving you a sense of these stats he put up in AAU: 15 points per game on 64% from the field, actually a 46% from 3 on 1 make a game, which is pretty huge for him as a swing skill, because it turns him from like 6'6" athletic wing in like the Andre Jackson mold. We talked a little bit about him. He's from Albany Academy, where like he's super athletic, but he's not big enough to play the 4, to like legit like 3-man who can really impact things. He also averaged about 6 rebounds per game, 5 rebounds a game. Made an impact rim protector as well, 27 blocks in 15 games. So he had a great summer, and I think he's a guy who could impact things off the bench. Maybe that's the guy who breaks out, but you need one, right? I think that's got to be the feeling for me, is you need at least one of these freshmen to perform outside their range in order for this team to really live up to the hype, especially with the bench. And so I think that's one of the things definitely to watch.
And then just for the sake of completing out the roster, Akingbola, who's probably not going to play a ton this year, I wouldn't think, as the third string center with McLemore and Wiley there. He was ranked 288th, 4 points a game, 7 rebounds a game, 2.6 blocks per game in AAU, and he's just like a power athletic shot blocker. Just hangs around the rim. He's gonna score dunks and layups, mostly dunks. But down the road he'll be like an interesting defensive 5-man for Auburn. But this year I think he's probably gonna see a smaller role. And then Alan Flanagan is ranked 297th. I think his dad's a former Auburn player, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's just a long-term piece on the wing there.
Yeah, and I think getting through the rest of the roster brings me to an interesting point. And, it's something that's hard to quantify. Auburn had an edge, really, from the start of the Bruce Pearl era, from 2 guys, Malik Dunbar and Horace Spencer. And Spencer was the guy, like, he was always pissed off on the floor. He always had, like, blood above his eye. He was yelling at people. Looked like he was constantly about to get in a fight. And, Dunbar was similar, like, just like a bulldog of a wing. And those guys gave them that edge. They were very good defenders. They knew their role. And I got asked the question about it on Twitter. Who's the guy who steps into that role? And I was like, I have never been asked such a direct question. Who's the junkyard dog for this Auburn team? And maybe it's Devin Cambridge. I think that's the guy who could potentially do that stuff. But I think that was a really fascinating question. I was wondering your thoughts on it. Was who's the guy who comes in and just gives you energy and gives you toughness and really knows his role? Because you need those guys to win.
Especially because a guy like Spencer, he sticks around all 4 years, despite being kind of blocked for playing time. He never got to play a ton, right? He was always in the rotation, but he never got to be like a 30-minute per game starter or anything. And to have those guys stick around and be older role players is a super valuable. So they're not going to have that this year. I mean, in terms of athlete, Franklin and Cambridge, Akingbola, I think could be like a real enforcer down the road. I don't see him getting a lot of time this year. Okoro and McCormick in the starting lineup, but that's not really like their roles are going to be much greater than that of like an energy spark. So I mean, if I were to guess, I would say either Franklin or Cambridge.
Good call. Okay. So just kind of quickly going through the strengths and weaknesses. You've gone through most of them. I said strengths were just overall athleticism between Okoro, Purifoy, Anthony McLemore, Cambridge. McCormick. They've got a ton of bouncy guys. I also thought they have the potential for the elite defense. Like I said, the switchability. Okoro's an impact defender. McLemore's elite rim protector. I think they could be really good defensively. And I think the balance between experience and young talent is also good. You've got that potential one and done. You've got a bunch of filler recruits on the who can play roles right away, and then you've got guys who played in Final Fours and J'Von McCormick and Samir Doty and Purifoy, McLemore, and of course Austin Wiley.
So I basically had the same strengths. I had front court, number one. I really like the three-man trio of McLemore, Wiley, and Purifoy. Okoro can slide down and play the four. They have guys coming off the bench like Jalen Williams, who I think could be the backup four, who I like. So I think the front court is a strength to them. Second, I put experience, right? I mean, they have a lot of older guys. It's tough to know all their eligibilities with all the suspensions, and Doty being a guy who redshirted, played a year, and then transferred. God knows what class half these guys are in. But they're older. They're experienced. So I think that's a plus. Athleticism. They have like 3 or 4 guys off the bench who I would kind of throw in the athlete archetype as a player, and then in the starting lineup, I mean, guys like McLemore is super versatile, super athletic for a 5-man. Okoro is a great athlete. And then lastly, I add that the defense should be really good on paper. Now, losing 4 starters, or I mean, Dunbar was like a part-time starter, so like 3.5 starters, and then losing Spencer off the bench, like we just touched on. We'll see if the whole defense gels as well as it did last year, which they were 36th in KenPom in defense. But I think on paper, the defense should be really good.
And then the weaknesses, I said the backcourt question marks, with no true creator. And then, I mentioned the balance and experience factor, but it's a young roster because you don't have guys like Spencer and Dunbar back who are, guys who got old to play on the bench. You've got 6 freshmen, JUCO, a redshirt sophomore who played 1 year of pretty uninspired basketball at Memphis. So in total, that's 8 guys who've, either never played D1 basketball or have never played for Auburn. And then, McCormick played 12 minutes a game. Purifoy played 12 minutes a game, right? Like you're just not looking at guys who played a ton of basketball. So there is kind of a young-ish feel to this roster at times.
Yep, so my key questions, the first, replacing the stud backcourt of Brown and Harper, and then kind of related to that, J'Von McCormick as the starting point guard, as the bridge probably from Jared Harper to Sharif Cooper. But in that bridge year, Auburn has some expectations, and then they're going to need him to be a very effective point guard. And then I also had transitioning to the new style of play. They don't have guys who can pull up from 3 in a transition and kind of shoot their way in and out of games. Guys like Bryce Brown who are just absolutely electric from 3. And then my last question. So, I mean, they have a lot of very good players, right? Like their whole starting lineup in Austin Wiley, I would call all those guys like a very good player. But is like a Samir Doty or a Isaac Okoro or Austin Wiley or Purifoy, are they good enough to be the best player on a successful Auburn team? And I honestly don't know if Okoro is as good as everyone kind of thinks he is. And I think he is good enough to be the best player. And then you have like a real nice core around him. Because I think guys like Doty, Wiley, Purifoy, they could be the third or fourth best player on a good team. It's just, for me, the question is, who has the chops to be the best player on this team?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's Okoro, but it reminds me of the question that we asked with Oklahoma. And the more I think about this team, the more I think it's very comparable to that Oklahoma team, where you have a bunch of newcomers, but you have a core of 6, 7, 8 guys who, profile as very good rotation players. You have guys that fit a system. You have an established coach. You have the potential for a very, very good defense. And then you've got this true freshman, with Oklahoma's Davion Harmon, with Auburn, it's Isaac Okoro. And how much can they lift these teams? So that's a pretty interesting comparison to another team we've done a deep dive on.
Yeah, and I have Auburn. I mean, I'll check right now, but it's definitely higher than Oklahoma. And so I have Auburn at 37, and I have Oklahoma at 55. So maybe I need to move Oklahoma up.
In fairness, I think Okoro is probably better than Davion Harmon.
Yeah, and I think Auburn's roster just fits better, right? Like they're not going to have to run out a Manic Doolittle front court, right?
Yeah. So I have Auburn at 34 and Oklahoma at 38. But I have
Auburn at 34, Oklahoma at 38.
Yes, but I'm higher on Auburn. On Oklahoma, I should say. We talked about that on that podcast.
Yeah.
But I have them 6 in the SEC. That's behind Arkansas, who I'm kind of ridiculously high on, as we've talked about. Bama at 4, LSU at 3, and then Kentucky at 2, Florida at 1. I don't know where you have them in the SEC.
I also have them 6th. I have Kentucky, Florida, Alabama, LSU, Mississippi State, which interestingly enough may lose Nick Weatherspoon for a third of the season because he had a tutor do his test for him, and Auburn at 6. So I have Auburn 37th nationally. For perspective, I have Mississippi State now at 27th, factoring in the Weatherspoon suspension, and I have Georgia at 44th, who I have as the 7th best team in the SEC. Bouncing over to the composite, Auburn comes in at 27, so just outside the top 25. I have 16, low of obviously unranked. 4 people have ranked Auburn. Let's see, who has them at 16? That would be Gary Parrish has 16.
That's bullish.
It is. And I mean, if everything breaks right, I mean, it's not ridiculous. Like if McCormick takes a step with more minutes, if Purifoy kind of regains his form as a top 50 recruit now in a bigger role, if Austin Wiley's active and motivated and Isaac Okoro is very good, I mean, they could be higher than 16. But I think the questions that we outlined, most notably the point guard play and who's their best player, I think kind of puts them more in the just above the bubble range. So, but maybe sweating it the week before championship week, but as the low major conference tournament starts, that you're probably going to be in the NCAA tournament.
And just wanted to quickly look at the schedule before we wrap up Auburn. They open with Georgia Southern. This is a weird schedule in that it feels like it's geared for the RPI, not the net, where they play like a ton of good mid-majors who will have good records. Georgia Southern's been consistent with Mark Byington at the helm. They play Davidson and Annapolis on a neutral. That could be a really fun game opening week. They go to South Alabama. That's awesome for South Alabama to get that home game. They're going to be a top 100 team. Cal State Northridge bye game. That team could be a factor in the Big West with Lamine Diane. Colgate top 100 team. New Mexico on a neutral court. They play. That's part of I believe the preseason NIT. Then they'll play Richmond or Wisconsin. Also at Barclays. They have Furman, another team. Solid mid-major program. St. Louis on a neutral. NC State as part of that 2-year series. Lehigh, consistently solid mid-major team. Lipscomb has a new coach, but should be okay. And then Iowa State in the Big 12 SEC Challenge. So maybe not some of the big names. I don't know if there's a team in there that you'd rank preseason on that schedule. I guess maybe if you like NC State a lot, but very few break games where if they're struggling out of the gates, they couldn't get upset.
Which I'm convinced with the net that it's being manually manipulated. Like you cannot tell me otherwise, right? I'm like the flat earthers. Like no matter what evidence you tell me, the earth is flat and the net is being manually manipulated. My leading theory is they do the raw data until like Christmas, and then they add in a strength of schedule component. That's my leading theory, and I can't be budged off it either way.
All right, come for the deep dive, stay for the conspiracy theories. That's what we do right here on the pod. Anything else, Brad, before we move on to Marquette?
That's it for me.
All right, give us the rundown.
Marquette, oh man, 24-10, 12-6 in the Big East, destroyed in the first round by Ja Morant. I mean, they just had no chance. But I mean, it was a symptom. I mean, they inexplicably folded down the stretch. They lost their last 4 Big East games. They were 12-2 at one point. They basically had the title locked up. They lost all 4 games, losing even a share of it to Villanova. And people will say, "Oh, Villanova wins every year." Well, they didn't win last year or 2 years ago. Xavier won. So stop with it. That's fake news there. But this was a golden opportunity for Villanova to lose the league 2 years in a row. But Marquette chokes. 33rd in KenPom, 32nd in offense, 45th in defense. And defense was the question coming in. And the trio, I think, of Theo, John, Brendan Bailey, and Sakar Neem, especially John, really solidified that defense. And I think the Hausers were a little better on the defensive end than people expected. So they were 18th in effective field goal percentage defense with John in the middle there. They were 297th in forcing turnovers. I mean, the Hausers are excellent players, but they're not the fleetest of foot on the wing there. Markus Howard's very small, and those 3 run the court a lot. So they were 81st in defensive rebounding. And then speaking of that rim protection with Theo John, 19th in 2-point percentage defense. Offensively, 12th in a 3-point percentage, only 68th in points off threes. They were 321st in points off 2. They have a completely new identity this year, kind of similar to Auburn, right, where Wojo is saying that they need to make the 2 bigs work. Inexplicably grabbed Jayce Johnson, giving them a 3rd center, and then they're going to have to play some combo with John Johnson and Morrow together, which is going to be interesting. One potential reason maybe why they did that, why they pursued Johnson, is Theo John only played like 19 minutes a game. He averaged 3.6 fouls a game in 19 minutes a game. He was I wrote it somewhere, I thought, but he had he was in like the top whatever percentage of fouls committed, like one of the most foul prone big men in the country. So if Wojo was just like, well, he's gonna foul and we need a replacement and we don't like Ed Morrow enough, I guess, then that's why they grabbed Jayce Johnson. But either way, whole new identity, going from shooting to size and athleticism. I looked at some of the box scores for their overseas trip, at least the first 2. And they were playing John and Johnson together, which, I mean, I guess go for it, Marquette.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one more statistic, just kind of in contrast. You mentioned that they were 19th nationally in 2-point defense, mostly related to that Theo John insertion to the lineup. And I will go out on a limb, I don't even know if it's a limb, and say that Theo John is the best player in the country who I guarantee you won't average 10 points a game.
Oh,
he is so good.
And as a freshman, he was horrible.
Oh my God. Couldn't see the floor.
When I ranked, so like in the preseason, I ranked every player. Then the day after the NCAA tournament, I ranked. This is a Big East players. I ranked every Big East player again, and Theo John made the biggest jump because, I mean, he was their backup center as a freshman, but he was just bad. I mean, he couldn't finish on the rim. He was just a disaster out there. And then for him to come in and average 6'5" and 2 blocks and be that amazing of a defensive anchor, and he's not like a super athlete or anything. He's just like a big, strong force in there. And that was really impressive. And now if they're gonna play him at the 4, like I don't like why.
No, they shouldn't screw around. But the stat I wanted to mention, Brad, the year before, actually I have two stats. The year before I mentioned that you said they were 19th in a 2-point defense in 2019. The year before, without Theo John playing any big minutes, 304th.
And that was
Can you imagine a jump like that?
That was with Matt Held at center?
Yes. I mean, Theo John played 27% of the minutes. And then Froling played a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And Held played some, and they played a little bit of small ball. Where they played did they ever play Sam Hauser at the 5?
I think very infrequently. I was hoping that they would play more Joey at the 5 this year in the preseason before Theo John kind of emerged. But yeah, it looks like it was mostly because Held played 22 minutes a game and then was relegated to nothing last year. He played 22 minutes a game. John played 12, and then Froling was there for 20 games, played 12 as well.
And the other stat I wanted to mention, free throw luck. I don't know, how much you buy into it, but in 2018, when Marquette was the 53rd ranked team in the country via Ken Pom, but was an NIT team, never really had a chance to dance. I mean, they made a push down the stretch that got them into the mix, but losing to Villanova by 24 in the conference tournament kind of did them in. Opponents shot 74.7% at the free throw line. That was 327th nationally. Fast forward to last year, where they're 24-10, and they're a clear NCAA tournament team despite the late season swoon, and their defense jumped, made that incredible jump that we were hoping for, and I think we deep dived on Marquette last year. And we're like, I don't know if it's going to happen, and we said Theo John was horrible and all that. Last year, they gave up 67.9% at the line, 38th in the country. I don't know if that's kind of pure regression of means, but that means something to me. I mean, they jumped 20 spots in Ken Pom year over year. And they went from the 182nd ranked defense to the 45th ranked defense. And the two main reasons why were teams just flat out couldn't score on the interior, and teams missed free throws.
So let's say on average, I mean, I don't really know this number off the top of my head, but let's say that a average opposing team shoots 30 free throws.
I can tell you exactly how many teams did on average, took last year on average.
Okay.
So teams took 725 free throws over 34 games last year. So that's probably 25?
21.
725 over 34. It's 21.
So, okay. 67% of 21 equals 14. So opposing teams averaged last year to get 14 points.
Yeah.
14 points off free throws. The year prior, when it was 74%, it was 15.5. So it was a point and a half a game that they were just gifted by luck.
That's fascinating. Does that matter given you played a lot of games that you won big? Probably not. But just the finals, we talked about those final 7 games when they went on a late season swoon. You lose by 2 to Seton Hall. You lose by 2 to Georgetown. You lose by 9 to Seton Hall. You lose by 6 to Creighton, and you lose by 6 to Villanova. And those are close games. You also won games by 1 over Villanova, 1 by 5 over Xavier, 3 over Georgetown, 4 over Seton Hall, 2 in overtime over Creighton.
Yeah, how about the Creighton game where what the guy he threw the outlet pass right out of bounds, and then Marquette got it on their end of the basket, and then was it Sam Hauser hit like the fadeaway three to win it with like half a second left?
Yep. That was a crazy, crazy game. But, like, I mean, I'm fascinated by this stuff. I think it's fascinating, the idea that, simply free throw luck could have determined, the difference between a tournament between like a 9 seed and a 5 seed.
Well, because the difference between a 9 seed and a 5 seed could be 2 games.
Yep.
I saw Michael Hunter was arguing on Twitter with someone where they said that NC State didn't miss the tournament because of their schedule. They missed it because they went over against Duke and Virginia or something. But that's the schedule, right? Is if you have more opportunities, who cares if you lose to Duke and Virginia, right? You have 5, 6, 7, 8 cracks at the apple, right? You have more chances to grab that big win. And let's say a team like Marquette, they get one more big win. Maybe they can move from a 6 to a 4 seed, and then instead of playing Murray State, I mean it's a whole butterfly effect.
Yeah, I mean we could talk about this all day, but we probably got to protect our rotation, don't we? So
Did you do ins and outs first?
I did not do ins and outs, so yeah, I'll do it right now. So 3 newcomers plus a transfer becoming eligible. So grad transfer Jayce Johnson comes in from Utah. He could have been used by a lot more teams. He was like a 7-7 guy, but he's very solid. He's not going to be a superstar, but he's not the rim protector Theo John is, but he can finish around the rim. He helps build this size and athleticism model that it seems like Wojo is moving towards. Then they add Kobe McEwen, the transfer from Utah State. He sat out last year, has about 15 points a game in Logan. He's a very, good two-way guard who can really score the basketball. Wasn't super efficient at Utah State, playing next to Sam Merrill, but will be an interesting piece in that backcourt nonetheless. And then 2 more guards to add to the mix, one of whom will play big minutes. Well, not big minutes, but rotation minutes, and the other will likely not play. Dexter Akano, a under-the-radar recruit who actually started one of the games in the international trip. And then 2020 reclass Symir Torrance, who was a top 50 recruit in 2020. I don't know where he wound up in 2019, but I like him a lot. I've watched a lot of City Rock, watched a lot of his game. He's like a 6'5", skinny, long, athletic point guard who can play off the ball a little bit, can catch and shoot, can slice to the basket. A good defender, a guy who has a lot of potential to be an excellent Big East player, whether that's after Markus Howard or in concert with Markus Howard this year.
So it was interesting. Oops, sorry, go.
Sure. And then out, Joe Chartouni graduates. Matt Helt graduates. Ike Ecke is medically retired after repeated back injuries and the transfers of the 2 Hausers to Virginia and Michigan State.
So it was interesting during their foreign trip. It looked like they did something which I'm gonna create a term for as the horizontal platoon, where I think when you say the word platoon, you think Kentucky. I'm gonna call that the vertical platoon, right? Like you're taking the whole lineup and you're switching that out, right? 5 for 5. Whereas with my new term, the horizontal platoon, it's just like a positional platoon, right? It's like if, for example, the box scores I saw, you could pretty much add Markus Howard plus Symir Torrance's minutes and get 40 minutes, right? You could add Dexter Akano and Kobe McEwen and get 40 minutes. It was all like 41-39, and then at center it was like 37-ish. But like every pair, it looked like that Wojo was like designated in pairs, and then they weren't playing like you would never play with your pair, right? So it was Howard and Torrance, McEwen and Akano, Neem and Kane, John and Bailey, and then Johnson and Morrow. Like I mentioned, getting John and Johnson together on the court. I think they're going to end up, even if they start like that, John and Johnson. I think if they're going to play 2 bigs, I think it's going to be one of them with Morrow. And the big swing piece for their ability to play like a normal modern lineup would be if Brendan Bailey can start hitting shots. I mean, he was solid last year. You want more offense out of him, but he was a good defender. He has great size. I think he'll be a key piece down the road, if he can kind of emerge more as like a scorer and a shot maker, I think there's a real place for him at a power forward here.
We talk a little bit about guys we thought were better than they were. I remember when everyone was hyping up Marquette, I saw a lot of tweets, I think from Jeff Borzello including, they were like, oh, Brendan Bailey's back. He was very good. You got the Hausers. But they were really hyping up Brendan Bailey. And I was like, I liked Brendan Bailey. He's a solid role player. But then I look at the stats. He averaged 3 points a game. And that's not to say that, he can't be better and that his impact wasn't, necessarily captured by the score sheet, because pretty much everyone on that team not named Markus Howard was taking a major backseat offensively. But, it's a significant jump they're going to ask him to make. I think he's the guy you pencil in at the 4 just because, it goes against everything I believe in as a basketball mind to play Jayce Johnson and Theo John to get together.
But if I could just interject, even when we're talking about like the late 2000s in basketball, like the Celtics, like the teams that if you were to watch their highlights now, it would not look like the same game of basketball. When they're playing like a true power forward and true center. Even in that case, the power forward is at least like a mid-range shooter, right? Like your Kevin Garnett's, your Pau Gasol's, right? Like they're now centers in the modern NBA, but as a power forward, they can stretch the floor out to a certain point. John and Johnson together is playing two centers. There is no floor spacing at all.
Right. If you ask me to designate the archetype, both of them is low post scorer and putback guy and lob catcher. They don't have any offensive game out the door. They can't dribble. They can't, they can't pass. They can't take a mid-range. I'd have to look at the free throw numbers. I wanted to pull those up just now. Theo John shot.
Johnson shoots 40% from the line. Jayce Johnson.
Yeah, and Theo John shot 50% from the line. You are asking to just get, just flat out hack a Shaq. Second of all, you're asking to, just get pressed. Teams will just press you and force Markus Howard, who's not a great decision maker, into, force the ball out of his hands and make two guys beat you. What are you going to do? Put two big men on a block and have Markus Howard dribbling around with Sakar Anim, who can't really shoot the three he shot it better this year, but he's not a shooter necessarily. Or Brendan Bailey, who shot 25% from three. It just doesn't work. We might see it 10 minutes a game, but you really want Brendan Bailey to be your 4. I think that's the goal, or even Jamal Cain. Here's the crazy theories that I have about this.
We don't have a Synergy subscription, so and I don't even know if you could check this on Synergy. I have a feeling that Jayce Johnson might be like an elite screener, where guys running off his screens might be in the I don't know, the 90-something percentile. Now I have nothing to base this off of in terms of watching him or anything. Just kind of trying to think through the potential thought process. That is it are they literally just trying to be we're gonna put the best lineup to get Markus Howard the best shots? Are John and Johnson just such good as screeners that it's gonna screen Howard open? And it also had me think of this crazier thought where so Markus Howard is elite from 3 and he's elite at getting to the line. Now this kind of contradicts the getting to the line part, but in terms of getting threes, right? We talk about spacing as a concept as maximizing the space on the floor of the team. But if you think of it as maximizing the spacing for Markus Howard, then is it better to have two guys that aren't going to go around the 3-point line? Are you giving him more space around the arc to potentially get a 3 by stashing two guys at the dunker spot?
I think it depends on how you're using Markus Howard. In my mind, Markus Howard is so ball dominant that he's not running off screens to get an open shot. He is creating his own shot. In which case, I want the perimeter to have the shooting, and I don't want the paint super crowded. where, I don't have enough room. Because I could understand the screener thing if you're going to run him off a bunch of screens, but you're not playing a second point guard. If the idea was, okay, we're going to play Symir Torres at the 2 because he's this, like, secondary ball handler extraordinary, can really pass and be a glue guy. I mean, I could probably get behind it because, okay, you're going to run Howard off a bunch of screens. But that's not really what you're going to do. You're going to have Markus Howard get put in a bunch of ball screens that teams are going to collapse like crazy on. Let's approach from a scouting perspective. If you're a defense and they trot out Jayce Johnson and Theo John together, and then they put out Sakar Annam and let's go with Sakar Annam and Kobe McEwen, and they put you in a 1-4 or 1-5 ball screen with either Theo John or Jayce Johnson setting the screen. How are you guarding that?
Make him a short roll. You double the ball, or hard hedge on the ball handler. Maybe even trap the ball handler. Make Johnson or John into a playmaker out of that short roll.
Yep. Jordan Sperber did a great column about this in his newsletter with Siena. And this is how teams defended Siena. Was Jalen Pickett was so dynamic with the ball, mostly because of his passing ability, not because of his shooting ability. But it was the same idea. Was, Siena spaced the crap out of the floor. I mean, they were playing 4 shooters. They were going to take guys who were only shooting, and then a big and Evan Fisher. But the plan was, blitz the ball handler, force it into Fisher's hands, and then recover. And Fisher was was not a quick enough reactionary guy. He wasn't a guy who could, make a quick move and take a pick and pop 3. He wasn't a guy who was going to put the ball on the deck and go to the rim, at least not quickly. You could rotate in time. And that's the way you're going to guard Marquette. If they put you in a ball screen with those 2 bigs, you're gonna have to pass the ball to Jayce Johnson at the top of the key. And I have no idea what Jayce Johnson's going to do at the top of the key.
I can see in my brain right now that they run the double at Howard. He kind of lobs it over the top to a Theo John, who catches it like in between the top of the key and the free throw line, and he immediately tries to put the ball on the floor and travels with a wide open lane. He's
going to do the one dribble into the dribble handoff to the non-shooter, Brandon Bailey.
I mean, you play that scenario, right? But I mean, they played or they started Howard next to Okoro. Okoro has that kind of combo guardness with him. I think Greg Elliott does as well, who's coming off an injury, actually multiple injuries. And then Kobe McEwen, he's attack first, but he has some combo guard ability. If you have one of them in a ball screen while running Markus Howard off a screen himself, then you can pull the big man out of the lane, right? If both of them are screening.
Yep. I think it can work. I prefer.
This is very unnecessary.
Right. I'd prefer to just play Brendan Bailey at the 4. Especially if he's out of a little bit of weight. He's versatile. He can defend multiple positions. The Big East is not going to play a ton of big guys. And then you've got Annam, you've got Okoro, you've got McEwen, Torrance, Howard. You've got tons of guards. You can split the minutes 25-15 or 20-20. Box Ed Moore out of the rotation. You want to occasionally toss this big lineup at us. That's fine. But the idea of playing this 2 big lineup, to me, I hate it. I think it's awful. And I love the idea of this roster in a lot of ways because Howard's excellent, and as much as that late season swoon soured the taste buds, this was a great team at one point. This was a really good team, and you've got John who could improve his offensive game. Annam was a guy I really liked, right? I mean, he can shoot the 3 a little bit. He's an excellent defender who can defend multiple positions. He knows his role. He can slash, pretty decent around the rim. You get a guy like Greg Elliott back who, has a chance to contribute. McEwen was a guy who, at 6'4", 200 is, prototypical size, can create a little bit, turns it over a lot, but, can get his own shot, which I think they needed another guard who could get his own shot. They're athletic. They should be better defensively even than they were last year, even if that free throw luck doesn't hold up from year to year. I like a lot of the things about this roster. I don't want to harp too much on this 2 big lineup, but it just seems so ridiculous in my mind that I felt like we had to talk about it a lot.
I mean, we talked about how ridiculous Nevada's proposed two big lineup was last year with Jordan Brown and Trey Porter. I mean,
right away.
I mean, yeah. Give me Brown and Porter over John and Johnson in terms of, and any day in terms of like a realistic setup.
Well, there was at least belief that Jordan Brown could shoot the ball. Jordan Brown, like he was athletic, like he could guard the perimeter. Do you really want to consistently switch Jayce Johnson or Theo John onto a guard? It just doesn't work. Jordan Brown, you could at least hope that could happen. Jordan Brown just kind of was lost on the floor. That was a bigger problem. But no, I mean, we shot that thing down so hard, and then like immediately the ship sunk. Immediately as soon as Muss was like, okay, yeah, they're gonna start, and then immediately it was like, all right, Trayshawn Thurman, here we go. Jordan Caroline, here we go. Let's play Jazz Johnson. We need the shooting. So I think this idea of the two big lineup, maybe more of a mirage, but Wojo said after the international trip, we have to do it. We have to play it. So we'll see what that means for Brendan Bailey. We'll see what that means for this roster. But in terms of projecting a rotation, I projected Howard, McEwen, Anim, Bailey, and John as the starters. I projected Torrance, Greg Elliott, Jamal Cain, and Jayce Johnson off the bench with Dexter Cano and Ed Morrow, the deep bench. I could see a Cano coming in, especially for Torrance. One of those two guys gets minutes, one of them doesn't. And then Ed Morrow, he'll play if they play two bigs. He won't play if they don't.
Yeah, so for mine, with Wojo saying two bigs and playing John and Johnson together, I went with Howard, McEwen, Anim, John Johnson. Anim is a lot better than most people think. You touched on him earlier, but only averaged eight points a game. But he's much better offensively than he gets credit for. He was like the fourth option, be a fourth wheel there with the Hausers and Markus Howard. Even if his stats aren't a ton better this year, he's very good. He's an impact player. He's a top 25 player in the Big East. Could be their second best player. Either him or Theo John is probably their second best player. Maybe Kobe McEwen if he kind of rounds into form there. And then my bench, with the two bigs, I have Ed Morrow. If it's one big, then Morrow's probably out, and you put Jamal Cain in. My other three being Elliott, who I really like, Brendan Bailey, and Samir Torrance. And Morrow was fine last year. Averaged 6 and 5. He's undersized for a center, but he's good around the rim. He's pretty bouncy. I mean, not like bouncy like the Auburn guys, but for a big man in his archetype, he's a below the rim guy, but he's active and he's pretty explosive below the rim. That's kind of an oxymoron, but I thought he was going to be a lot better given what he did at Nebraska, and he was the 4 next to Michael Jacobson at Nebraska, but played almost exclusively 5, if not all exclusively 5 last year. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, he could get some power forward minutes, and 6 and 5 as the backup center wasn't terrible last year. But I expected a little more out of him last season.
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree on everything you said. I could see Morrow as a 4. I can't see the two bigs, like we said. I want to love this team. I have them 24th in my top 100. So I'm ranking them. I also think that I have them 3rd in the Big East. I think they have a chance, right? Like they really do. I just want them to be smart and play, a normal lineup because I think things could tank quickly if not. And it's funny. We always think, okay, if we see it, how come a coach can't? But coaches come at it from a very different perspective. And I think that's one of the things to always remember. Coaches see things differently. Sometimes coaches are stubborn. Coaches have egos. They make decisions and they want to prove them right. And sometimes that happens. I saw it with Siena several times with Jimmy Passos. And one of my biggest frustrations was an inability to admit when you made a mistake. And we'll see if Wojo can do that. And if he decides to start playing the two big lineup and it doesn't work. Because I'll admit I'm wrong if it doesn't work.
Okay, for me, the X factor is Kobe McEwen. Had some draft buzz at Utah State. I mean, he was a guy that a lot of people liked. But we touched on this, I think, a few podcasts ago. For a Utah State to lose McEwen, who at the time was seen as their best player, and be so much better, that with the coaching change and with adding Kata. But I mean, that's a really weird kind of wrinkle there for a Kobe McEwen that they didn't miss a beat at all with him gone in the backcourt. And he's an attack first guard. It'll be interesting to see how he fits with Markus Howard. His addition for me, it's clear that Woj didn't think Howard was coming back for his senior year before his junior year, if that makes sense, right? Like when he was in a position to take Kobe McEwen, I think he probably envisioned McEwen, Annam, the Hausers, and J'Von being his starters. The Hausers are gone now, and I think the Howard McEwen backcourt being two attack first guys, it's going to be interesting, but I think that they can make it work.
Yeah. No, okay. That makes sense. Just in terms of the strengths and weaknesses I wrote down, I said, one of the best, if not the best scorer in the country, Markus Howard. He's really good. We didn't talk about it a lot on this podcast because there wasn't a lot to say, but pretty much we know what he is. I'd be surprised if he adds something to his game that's drastically different from what we've seen so far. He's a really good scorer. He's a really good shooter. He can take over a game. No one can get hot like him, but he can also shoot you out of a game at times. But that's a strength for sure, and the potential for a really good defense. John is an excellent defender, and instead of playing the Hausers, who are both, especially Sam Hauser, below average athletes, you're going to be playing Brennan Bailey, McEwen, Annam. Elliott's a solid defender. Torrance, I think, will make plays defensively. They have a lot of potential on that side of the ball. So for me, those are the two strengths. The weaknesses I wrote down were spacing, especially if they're playing two bigs, and then weird enough backup point guard, right? Like, I mean, you're going to play Howard so much, but if something were ever go wrong or foul trouble or whatever, you're either counting on a freshman who should still be in high school and Simon Torrance, who's maybe not necessarily a true point guard, or you're counting on maybe Dexter Cano, who's a combo, McEwen, who's a combo. I guess you just go into chucker mode, but that's just a random small concern I wrote down.
For me, my strengths: elite scorer in Markus Howard. They have a deep front court with John Johnson Morrow, and John's a great anchor. Super versatile roster. Guys like Brendan Bailey, Sakar Annam, Greg Elliott, who have a lot of length, a lot of athleticism. Can play multiple positions. For those who don't remember Elliott, because he missed all last year, he's like a 6'3", 6'4" combo guard who's super long, super active, and athletic on the defensive end, and he has potential as a shooter. And as someone who can do a little more with the ball, he has a tremendous upside. So if he's healthy, which he's currently not right now, he was injured all last year with a shoulder, and now he has an ankle injury. But if he's ready to go and healthy, he'll be a nice piece for them. And they are pretty experienced. Their whole starting lineup are upperclassmen. Off the bench, you have Bailey and Elliott who are in the rotation throughout their Marquette careers, and you have Jamal Cain, who's been in and out of the rotation. Morrow was a rotation guy as a senior, so there's a lot of experience here. And then for the question marks, totally different style, going from shooting to the size athleticism. Can the two big men work? And then without the Hausers, does Marquette have enough shooting? Right, we touched on Bailey didn't shoot it great. Elliott isn't. He shot a good percentage, but he's still emerging as a shooter. Annam shot it well. He's not known as a shooter. So besides Markus Howard, is there enough shooting on this roster? And then the defense should be better on paper, but will that materialize? I think that the defense will. And then the supporting cast looks deep, but next to Markus Howard, having Annam or John or McEwen as your second best player is fine. But I think ideally you would want a better second best player.
Yeah, no, I totally buy that. I think the second best player point was one I was thinking about. Or at least second best offensive player, right? Because we know Theo John is a super impactful player. To me, he's the second most important player on the team without a doubt, just because of what he brought last year and how much it changed that team. But having a guy who you trust to get a bucket, hopefully that's McEwen, but more of like an all-around player than just a guy who's a shooter or a shot maker like McEwen. So that's a fair point for sure.
Predictions. I have Marquette 7th in the Big East, but 36th overall. So I have them one spot higher than Auburn. So I mean, this is safely in the tournament as a 9 seed.
Yeah, I have 7 Big East teams in the top 40 as well. So it just kind of shakes out. I have them 3rd in the Big East, but again, that could be decided by a game. It could be a tiebreaker between 3rd and 7th. I mean, it's so tight. It's 20 spots nationally. That's a game or two. Not much will deter. Not much of a gap between all these teams. None of them look elite. Like I don't look at Villanova or Seton Hall and be like, man, that team's gonna be so much better than anyone else. Like, who is the worst team? Like if I told you preseason Marquette wins the Big East, you have them 7th in the Big East. Would you be surprised, stunned, floored, not overly surprised?
I would be surprised, but I wouldn't be floored.
Right. I mean, what other league is the 7th best team in your preseason rankings? You're like, yeah, that's surprising, but it's not crazy.
Well, it's because the Big East doesn't have like the elite teams of like the SEC or the ACC. So that's kind of the main factor there. But then it's just so deep in that middle of the pack that I mean any one of those 7 teams, I guess with the exception of Georgetown. If a Georgetown won the Big East, I would be floored. But any of the other teams being Providence, Creighton, Xavier, Seton Hall, Villanova, even Marquette, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I'll buy Georgetown.
I mean, I would be surprised. I wouldn't be floored.
Just running through the schedule quick for Marquette. They open with an interesting bye game against Loyola Maryland, with Santi Aldama, Golden Dyke, and the rest of that really good recruiting class coming in, combining with Andrew Kaseka, who's an elite wing player. So they'll win that game, but it'll be close. It'll be a battle. Then they have Purdue a week later at home. That's a really interesting test for 2 teams I'll have in the top 25 preseason. They then go to Wisconsin in rivalry game. Robert Morris is a pretty easy bye game. Then they go out to Orlando. They play in the Orlando Invitational. They open with Davidson in that event. Likely USC after that. And then the other side of the bracket features such teams as Texas A&M, Maryland, Harvard, and Temple. So Maryland's the best chance for an elite win there. They could play in the championship game of that potentially. Then they play Jacksonville, pretty easy bye game. At Kansas State, won't necessarily be easy, but Kansas State just doesn't have the firepower. Then a bunch of easy bye games to wrap it up. Grambling, North Dakota State, Central Arkansas. This schedule is not... It has the challenges at the top, but also some pretty easy ones at the bottom.
Yeah, and I mean that's a whatever schedule. The ups at least give you the opportunities. Kind of the opposite of Auburn, right? Where Auburn is playing all these challenging mid majors that's going to hurt their raw efficiency rating. But with the strength of schedule component, they'll be helped there. In terms of the composite, so this is post Kerry Blackshear, but I don't know if I got Kevin's most updated one here. I won't update him again until like the October ones before the season, where I'll get probably like up to 30 different polls. But in this post Kerry Blackshear world, 4 people ranked Marquette, the highest being at 21, and that person was Jeff Borzello.
Borzello was high from the beginning, so that's not a huge surprise. And then before we wrap it up, Brad, just kind of want to get your takeaways on the contract extension. We don't have all the details, but he gets an extension in May, does Wojo that signs him through the 2023-24 season. Kind of interesting. I think he was in a spot where he had to get either extended or fired. So they kind of had to give him it. But one of those where winning an NCAA tournament game or two would have earned him a little longer leash here if they do start to go down the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think it was probably the right move, because I think that they go back to the NCAA tournament this year. So that'll be, I think, 3 trips in 6 years for him, which Marquette wants more, obviously, but I think that's fine. They should have a solid recruiting class. They already have a top 100 guy in Justin Lewis, who's a power forward. And then for next year, they'll have Theo John, they'll have Brendan Bailey, they'll have Torrance and McEwen and Elliott. And so, I mean, they have enough pieces to remain competitive going forward. I know that the big recruit that they were mentioned with early, who I'm not sure if they're still involved with, was a Dawson Garcia, who was like a top 30 power forward / center, like a 6'11" skill guy. If they got him, I mean, that would really help their upside there. I'm not sure how realistic that is anymore, but I mean, they're definitely going to get at least one more top 100, I think. So they should have a solid class.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be out here and just say right away, I'm not a huge Wojo guy. Never really have been. I think I said on this podcast last year when we were breaking down Marquette that I wasn't super excited about the team, and he proved me wrong until obviously that late season swoon. It just hasn't. Maybe it's the Duke guy label, and I'm seeing it with Chris Collins, and it just hasn't felt right to me. I mean, obviously you're not expecting him to be as good as Buzz Williams, who is a terrific coach, but they just haven't had a season where they put it all together yet. And I'd like to see that happen sooner rather than later. Otherwise, you start to feel like this is a constant slight underachiever. A group that maybe not developing enough talent. You lose your two great players when you're about to have a top 10 team. That starts to make you a little uneasy. I'm still kind of a wait and see on Wojo guy. And do we know what he is at this point? Maybe. And I'm not so sure I'm huge on what that guy is, but it's probably enough where it's hard to fire that guy.
Yeah, he's in a real, I mean, not the level of a Jamie Dixon, but like a Jamie Dixon effect could be going on where he's winning enough not to get fired, but like you want something new, so you kind of push him out the door and then ends up being worse. But yeah, I mean, Buzz Williams, when he left, the program wasn't big. But I mean, he took a couple of recruits with him, and that kind of caused Wojo to have to rebuild there. And they had a few guys who didn't pan out, like a Harry Froling. I think Juwan Johnson was good as a senior, but he underachieved based on his recruiting ranking. But I think that they're in a solid spot with Wojo. It wouldn't be crazy to rank this team in the top 25, and if you do, that's having them as like a 6 seed or a 5 seed, which they were this year, but that puts you in a good spot to get a first round win and really start to build some momentum.
Yep, they're in good shape. At least this year, they still have one of the best players in the country, potential All-American. So that's a good way to start, certainly, and I think they'll be in solid shape going forward as long as he can continue to land. The recruits he's landing. Torrance is a great piece. Like I've said, like I said, I'm worried about this too big thing. Excuse me, too big thing. I mean, we're not there yet. But no, I mean, I just think it'll be weird. I hope you all enjoyed us spending 10 minutes breaking down how to guard them in ball screens when they play two bigs. It was a great time, Brad. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Of course.
And so we'll wrap this podcast up because we're already an hour and a half in, as we always seem to wind up. Even though we kind of shoot this as an hour podcast. It does happen. And I appreciate all of you sticking with us through the entire ramblings that we go on. Once again, please, if you enjoy those ramblings, give us a nice review. Give us 5 stars on the Apple Podcast app or wherever you listen to your podcast. We got a lot of exciting stuff coming with the show over the next several weeks and months. So keep with us, and we'll hope to continue to grow the show like we have all summer and even before that. So we appreciate you listening and hope you have a great rest of your week.